So my name is Mamel Lotignani. I'm the Optus Chair of Cybersecurity and Data Science at the University of South Australia. So I think, as you can imagine, we hear about cyber threats and cyber risks every day. I think what we are seeing over time is just the increasing sophistication of these threats and the impacts of these threats. And I think the biggest challenge globally that we're seeing is that cybersecurity is becoming a very lucrative business, both on the defender side, but unfortunately also on the attacker side. So I would say, the biggest challenge globally is, how do we deal with this cybercrime industrial complex in a sense? It's almost too easy to be a criminal and to make money in cybercrime. And I think that's the biggest challenge because it's fueling the increasing frequency of cyber attacks that we see. All of us are increasingly using digital technologies, IoT devices in our homes, wearable computing. All of these are exposing us increasingly to cyber threats. And I think, coupled with AI and some of the recent technologies, really we are seeing a whole host of new sophisticated cyber threats globally. Globally, cybercrime is estimated to cost about 8 trillion globally. So think about the numbers, it's quite huge. So I think if you look at it in those terms, the numbers are staggering. And if you look at it in terms of organizations, it's about $4 million global average. But I think another big cost that we need to account for as well is the impact on organizations, their reputation, on individuals who get personal data breached. So I think these are all the costs that we need to think about when we think about cybercrime. And yeah, definitely we need to be looking at new approaches of dealing with cybercrime. How do we strengthen the collaboration between different sectors of society, but also globally strengthening the multilateralism around cybercrime as well. So I think maybe all of us, we have some accounts of some sort. Are we protecting our accounts in terms of very strong authentication, strong passwords, password managers, multi-factor authentication? These are really just basic cyber hygiene practices that if you take the equivalent of health hygiene practices, we should all be doing exactly the same thing in the cyberspace. Unfortunately, because we always hear about the bad news in the media, we don't see all the other positive news in cybersecurity. There's a nice statement that says, we win 99% of time in cybersecurity. So there's a lot that is being defended. There's a lot of cyber attacks that are being stopped. Unfortunately, we only hear about that 1% where something goes wrong. And I think, once again, from an individual level, there's a lot that we can do to really stop the basic cyber attacks. The reality of digital transformation and relying on digital technologies is that we need to be increasingly more resilient, right? How do we deal with the fact that things might go wrong and therefore be able to adapt and improve going forward?